Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When you retire from an organization after 36 years of service, you have this kind of identity crisis. And that is, you keep getting asked this question, who you're affiliated to, you know? Well, there are my affiliations. I must announce now that any Western Province supporters, you're in serious danger here, because KZN has this no tolerance policy. Okay. Overview. What am I going to try and achieve this afternoon? As conservation biologists and practitioners, we involve ourselves in a number of really interesting activities. Conservation planning, biodiversity status assessments, at all kinds of resolutions, stated biodiversity reporting, monitoring and surveillance, adaptive management. These are all viable activities on their own. Everybody does them. Some do a lot, some do little bits and pieces. But in my opinion, they would be much more powerful as tools, or as an overall tool, if we implemented them in a much more integrated manner. So in this presentation, what I'm going to try and do is briefly outline the concepts around the intentions of these activities or tools, and then try and draw them together in a single integrated model, which I hope will add rigor to contemporary conservation practice in this country. And I think I aim this presentation at the younger ecologists in the audience, or conservation practitioners, and also the decision makers and implementers, simply because as an ecologist practicing for so long, I was bewildered by all of these things and how they fit together. There was no apparent model which kind of indicated how they all came together. Right, so conservation planning. Conservation planning falls broadly into three spheres. The systematic conservation planning activity, which a lot of us are very familiar with. It produces these spatial plans, like we see there, which prioritize areas in the landscape for conservation. We have site planning. We have protected area management plans, which emphasize the implementation of management prescriptions for set biodiversity assets. Many of the times, these biodiversity assets are identified through the systematic conservation planning process. Then we have species level planning, and in this country we have things called biodiversity management plans for species, BMPSs, which emphasize management prescriptions for single species at multiple localities or sites. So it is not a spatially explicit plan, it's a species explicit plan which looks at the species over its full range. All of these plans are target or objective driven. All activities are incomplete without monitoring and assessment of how well we are actually achieving this. Let's move on. Biodiversity state assessments. What is a biodiversity status assessment? It's a critical evaluation of information for the purpose of guiding decisions in a complex public issue. In this case, biodiversity conservation. What do we have in this country? We have National Spatial Biodiversity Assessment, like the 2004 one, the NSBA, which was a comprehensive spatial assessment of biodiversity throughout the country. It was a status assessment. We have more recently the update to that, the National Biodiversity Assessment, or the NBA 2011, which goes a little bit further. It assesses the state of South Africa's biodiversity and ecosystems with a strong focus on spatial analysis with a view to understanding trends over time. We also have species red list assessments, and from which one can obtain a red list index, and individual species status assessments. Then we have, as we heard earlier today, management effectiveness assessments, which are applied at the protected area level. So those are some of our broader planning tools that we have in this country. Then we have state of biodiversity reporting, or, and the question I asked, does South Africa have state of biodiversity report? We do have the National State of Environment report, which gets updated every 6 or 7 or 8 years, depending on how quickly these can get produced. In the latest one, which is up on the web, the 2006 State of Environment report, we have quite a comprehensive chapter 5, biodiversity and ecosystem health. The problem with that I find is that there's no trend analysis or there's no target evaluation. The public that is looking at these reports doesn't know really where our biodiversity is going and whether or not we are achieving the biodiversity targets that we are aiming to achieve. And then again, yes, okay, so that's the second, that's the best we can do as far as state of biodiversity reporting goes. Biodiversity monitoring, okay? What is monitoring? Monitoring is the collection and analysis of repeated observations or measurements to evaluate change in status or condition and progress towards meeting a management objective. It is not below its surveillance. Surveillance in the collecting is a collection of status and distribution data at a point in time in the absence of a specific management context. Now, I think that is very critical to grasp. We all say we're doing monitoring. Most of us are doing surveillance. We're just looking at what's happening to the thing without this direct feedback into management or achieving objectives. The important thing about monitoring is that observations must be directly linked to management objectives and measure the outcomes of management. They should be aimed at measuring the outcomes of management. Monitoring is a critical component of adaptive management, which I'm going to speak about a little bit later. The closest thing that we've come to producing some kind of conceptual framework around monitoring is in this paper by Reyes and McGeoch, a biodiversity monitoring framework for South Africa, progress and directions. I don't think we've progressed since then in an overall framework for monitoring in terms of either developing the framework or implementing what they have put into their paper. Now, I think it was a very nice paper that they put together there. While monitoring is fun to do, it is not just done for fun. Okay, that is important. Most of us ecologists go out and do things because they're fun. Okay, but we've got to realize that we can't just do it for fun. Monitoring is a formally planned, standardized, and documented activity, and I think we've got to get that into our heads. To be seen as a worthwhile activity, the results of monitoring must be seen to be timeous and at a resolution and level of certainty pertinent to the decisions that are taken. There's nothing worse than presenting monitoring data and get questioned about whether the technique has remained standard over the period of time that you've been monitoring, and people are having doubts and questions about the actual validity of the trends that you're trying to present. To be successful, however, monitoring, it is required to have a long-term commitment in terms of funding and resources, and this is an absolutely critical point, and it's a thing where South African monitoring has fallen down hopelessly in the past. Adaptive management, a decision process that promotes flexible decision making and management action that can be adjusted in the face of uncertainty as the outcomes from management actions and other events become better understood. It's touted as the only model for managing environmental problems. Okay? The adaptive management model. And the key points to note include that adaptive management openly acknowledges uncertainty about how ecological systems function and how they respond to management actions. Adaptive management is designed to improve understanding. It's not research, okay? It's designed to improve understanding of how a system works so as to achieve management objectives. Adaptive management is about taking action pursuant to desired outcomes. Probably the best examples of adaptive management in this country is the way Sandparks, in particular Kruger, have approached the implementation of adaptive management in the management of certain elements within the park. I see very few other good examples of properly documented and strictly implemented adaptive management in this country. Okay, integration of the tools. Are these conservation tools integrated in the manner which is understood by decision makers, the public, and even conservation practitioners? I have struggled with this. Okay, I don't think it is, and I don't think it is evident to people out there that there is a structure that guides us to improve our situation with regard to environmental management. So what I've tried to do here is put up a very simple straw dog for such a model. The first part of it is clearly we need to be identifying our goals and objectives. Where do I press? That was a twist.
It was on for a second. On again.
Okay, you've got to press it, not twist. Okay, so the first part of it is deciding on our targets, our goals and objectives. And clearly, just in the last slide, I'll question whether in fact we've done this clearly in this country and whether we have commitment to it. But once we've got our set of targets and commitment to targets, we can now convert these into plans. Okay, we've got our systematic conservation plans, which are target-driven, protected area expansion plans, target-driven, biodiversity management plans for species, target-driven, protected area management plans, all target-driven, objective-driven. In order to understand whether these things are working in terms of implementation and so on, we've got to monitor. Monitoring must have, as I've said earlier, alluded to earlier, monitoring plans are about documenting procedures to undertake monitoring to achieve, to test whether the management implementations are in effect having any kinds of effect on the state of the resource. So monitoring plans, that gives rise to our monitoring activities, which can then be reported in status or state of biodiversity reports and so on and so forth. In the meanwhile, through our plans, our management must take place. And the state and the outcomes, which record the outcomes of management, must be evaluated. And I think that in terms of evaluation, this is where we are falling down. Because there's absolutely no feedback, or very little feedback, back into our management to correct where we are not achieving our objectives that we so desperately want to achieve. Similarly, is there feedback into our planning activities through this process? So I think if we start connecting the boxes and make sure that in all of these activities we are connecting these boxes, we're seeing that monitoring plans or monitoring activities must feed into a larger report that allows us to evaluate the outcomes of management, and those get fed back into management, they get fed back into planning, or they even might get fed back into resetting or realignment of our targets around something which is much more realistically achieved. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm proposing we use as our straw dog going forward. Okay, so in conclusion, I believe that South Africa is blessed with a wide range of exciting, excellent tools for conservation management. We have the hard and innovative work of the Sandby ladies to thank for this. They're really driving force behind a lot of these plans lies in a small group of people within SANDRA. But one is always left with this kind of underlying perception amongst conservationists that things are going backwards. Okay? We are losing the battle. Conservation, we're losing the battle. But where do we get this from? It's not me. Why do we feel this? We feel this because there's no hard information telling us whether or not all the activities that we are doing are actually achieving anything. We don't see any graphs which show things going up or things going down over time and so on and so forth. All we get is these punctuated, every 5, 8, 10 years we get another state of environment report which says this and so on and so forth. There's no trend, there's nothing driving us. And there's nothing which feeds back into management which says, hang on guys, we're not achieving what we're hoping to achieve, we've got to change something. So, my personal perceptions are, we have failed to get buy-in into what we in this country want, i.e. we have weak buy-in and commitment to achieve conservation targets and goals. Number one, and I think that's the first thing I think we've got to try and tackle. Long-term data which demonstrates the decline in biodiversity from landscapes to genes is lacking. It's weak at best and is unconvincing. People will turn around and say, oh, estuaries are all in KZN are all in a moderately good condition. But go back 50 years and you'll see what you see now is totally different from what there was 50 years ago. How can we be saying that? Okay? And finally, we have no effective adaptive management model to integrate existing tools to effect improved conservation management and biodiversity outcomes. And I'm hoping that what I've presented here is a start down that road.
Thanks, Peter, for finishing on time. I'm sure there are a couple of questions from the audience. Let's start at the back.
Pete, don't you think adaptive monitoring would be part of that too? Not just monitoring, but adaptive monitoring. Because